2 minutes. Okay, turn them in. Okay, first an announcement, and it occurred to me when a student asked me this morning that in fact I had this problem in the past, that, and so this is not a favor to you, all right? So before you get all like nicey about it.
Due date on Tuesday.
I'm being nice to your moms. Okay? You need to spend more time with your mom.
Wait, what's that to do? Is it Sunday?
It will be due the next day.
Wait, it's just Sunday?
Thank God.
Yes. So it's not due on Mother's Day. Give your mom some attention and then come back, make sure you prove these papers and then they're... Again, this is not a favor to you, so don't get all like things about that.
We love you, doctor.
Your
My
mom
mom
can
is-
thank you later.
What if my mom's dead?
So what would we do like at 11:30?
Affect your due date.
Yes.
So we can come and ask for the feedback Monday.
So that means you'll see me on Monday and then you can still like, ask me last minute questions. And in the meantime, you'll see your moms on Sunday without the pressure to paper on.
Well, there'll always be pressure on paper. It'll still be there. I just won't. It'll be less for the next day. Yeah.
Then your due date is Sunday.
Oh, okay. Well, yours is due on Sunday.
He's gonna Skype her.
Oh, yeah.
So, what I did this morning was, because I know this is impending, I'm going to make myself available for questions about your papers, because at this point you should all have made some progress.
Huh?
Okay.
Progress.
I
So-
wrote a page, but I have no idea what I'm writing.
No, I meant progress because
There is
progressives.
a point though where like I can't actually write it for you.
No, but you can tell us what we're trying to
Yeah.
I can answer questions.
Are we arguing?
And then
Is it like
beyond answering your questions. Yeah, what's up, Thomas?
Could you mention the failures that happened with progressivism as opposed to the dysfunction and successes? Like include that.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I it's fine. I'll reiterate this. So in the last couple of days, I mentioned the New Deal. And one of the things about that is I said, well, this is really interesting because one, Roosevelt was the guy who was a progressive era legislator in New York, and he's the one who gets behind all that 1913 reforms after the shirtwaist factory fire and the girls died. Right? Now he's president, and progressivism is back. But what's interesting about progressivism coming back, besides the fact that it was disrupted by World War I in the 1920s, the other part about that that's interesting is that it means that a whole lot of stuff that he's doing in the 1930s, the progressives didn't even get anywhere near that. Like the 8-hour day. I mean, the entire period from the 19th century through the early 20th century, and not until 1934 did they actually get a recognized 40-hour work week with an 8-hour day. Right? Another example. Yes.
Was that mandatory or was that just recommended?
So that's the legal definition by the federal government. The government now defines the minimum wage. Now that can slide. So for example, the current minimum wage is worth less than it's been for the last 50 years. You have to go back to 1962 to find the minimum wage equivalent to what it is today, right? So you can let it slide and it will be worth less. But we still have a minimum. We have a 40-hour work week, which is defined for wage workers. And wherever you work, so eventually maybe not all of you will necessarily end up in wage jobs, but anyway, if you have a job that pays by the hour, there will be somewhere in the workplace that actually has the federal law, your rights as a worker listed on the wall. Most of that comes out of this 1930s period, and among other things, it defines the work week as 40 hours long. Anything over 40 hours, if you're a wage worker, it has to be paid overtime. And you divide that by 5 working days, that's an 8-hour day. Now, this doesn't apply if you're on salary. So, like, teachers at IMSA are on salary, so it doesn't count. If I work 40 hours, I work 70 hours, the pay is the same.
But that also means you work 20.
Just don't work.
I think you have to work it.
If you work 20 hours, they're expecting that you're honest in your timesheets, and then the state audits you, and then they actually dock you all that.
What's an audit?
It's where the state sends an accountant, and they look for discrepancies.
What if there are no discrepancies? No discrepancies.
Well, if there's no discrepancies, then great. But the auditors know. Well, we actually, since I brought the auditors, the auditors are essentially in the role that we would see the people working for the various commissions. This idea, you create a bureaucracy, you want to have, if you want to have good government, it actually costs a little bit of money because you need to have auditors assuring that there isn't this corruption or people stealing their wages because they're not really working 20 hours a
What's
week.
stopping auditors from
I suppose it could happen, but there's all kinds of policing within the Inspector General's office.
Oh, yeah.
This is the office of the
Can I be an
Inspector.
inspector?
Inspector Gadget.
It's something to aspire to.
Inspector Gadget just loaded it.
Is there like a federal minimum wage and then like each state is different minimum wage?
So there is a federal minimum wage. States can change it, though it doesn't always happen. Cities can too, in fact. So 2 years ago, the city of Seattle was the first city to declare a $15 an hour minimum wage.
$15 an hour.
Why did the states get rid of it?
The states?
Yeah. So like they can change it. So does that mean they get rid of it?
No, they can't get rid of it because the way the federal law works, the federal law always circumcedes the.
And how can they change it?
Well, you can go above it, but you can't undercut it. So they can decide they're going to pay more, but they would not be able to pay less. Because if you pay less, then you're breaking federal law. But if you go above, you're not breaking federal law.
Still today?
It's being incrementally implemented over the course of the next 3 or 4 years. So it went up a little, it's going up a little more, and I guess it's by next year it will be at 15.
Wait, so it's
Now,
like
for what it's worth, I used to live in Seattle. It's gotten incredibly expensive, and so a $15 an hour minimum wage is probably a really good idea. I don't know how you would live on less money. In fact, all the jobs I had were really poorly paid. It's one of the reasons I'm not still living in Seattle.
Is everything expensive because the minimum wage is so high?
Yeah. It seems like
So,
does inflation
that's
follow that, or does it?
not necessarily. So, in fact, when the wage, this has been studied, when the minimum wage is actually as low as it is right now, you can actually increase it quite a bit without actually causing any inflationary effects. And you can also increase it significantly with only slight inflationary effects. The problem isn't inflation per se. The problem is when inflation is totally out of control. So some kind of inflation is actually to be expected. I mean, all the time. I mean, that's what those business cycles are actually telling you when you have that wave. I mean, this is inflationary, deflationary. So there's always some growth.
You know how like money just being like worth less and less as time goes on, like in the 1900s, like $1 million was like way more than it is now. So is can it ever go back to that, or is money just gonna keep getting down?
You're talking about the real wage, maybe. Is that what you mean?
I mean, I was just like looking at this inflation calculator, and it just keeps going lower and lower.
Okay, so this guy, Thomas Piketty, he's a economist at the University of Paris who's French.
Ew.
He wrote, ew!
I didn't mean to say it that loud.
Anyway, a couple of years ago, he published this book called Capital of the 21st Century. It's unusual for an economics book, especially one that actually has like math in it, to be a bestseller. But it was a bestseller. And not only was it a bestseller, a lot of people were calling it like the most important book probably for the next decade. I mean, it made a huge, incredible impact. Academics don't usually write bestsellers, but this one was. Here's what he did. He went back and, but actually, if you want, you can look it up. If you want, all his data is online. He put, so the book itself, you don't have to buy the book, but his data, he wanted everyone to be able to scrutinize it and see that, as he put it, he's correct. And a lot of people agree that he is. So he put all of his data online. And anyway, to cut to the chase here, he found that inflation was pretty nominal, which is to say there wasn't very much of it up until the 20th century. And he offers interesting examples. So his wife got him to read like classic literature, which he would normally read. And so he's reading these Victorian novels, right? And he says, well, it's really interesting because you can read a novel written in the early 19th century and a novel written at the end of the 19th century, and they'll both refer to like the cost of things, and the cost hadn't really changed very much. As an economist, this is something he would pick up on right away. Like, wow, 80 years, and it turns out it was the same cost for a horse as it was in the beginning and the end of the 19th century. That's incredible. It means and he went back and looked, and sure enough, the data showed there wasn't very much inflation. This is really a product of the 20th century, and industrial capitalism just being the powerful engine that it is. Inflation is much more of an issue now than it ever was. Now, in terms of the real wage, that's a different problem entirely. So real, whenever you see real in economic terms, it means adjusted for inflation. So if you have a chart, you're looking at wages over time, it says real, it means it's already adjusted for inflation. That way you can actually, they're all put in the same equivalent dollar amount. What PPD does with his data is he gets everything into an equivalent measurement system so that everything is comparable to everything else. Capital in the 21st century. You did?
Yeah, we started at the end, we got economics. Like, what's economics? And we're all like, here's this book, and we all have to.
How much of it did you read?
Not a lot.
I read it during nap time in kindergarten.
You had nap time in kindergarten?
It's
That was a real thing?
It's over 500 pages long.
Hey, we get 20 minutes for nap time.
It's pretty high level academic writing. And fortunately translated from the French, because I guarantee the French is even more opaque.
I was ahead of my class.
You were
A little bit.
accelerated kindergarten.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I drank tea instead of tea.
Because we know sophistication comes from consuming tea. What?
Call me Mr. T.
Other questions about your paper?
Wait, I'm actually progressivism.
So, I know I've intentionally created this ambiguity for you, which as math and science students is supposed to just drive you absolutely insane.
Yeah.
That is the job of humanities as science students, to drive math and science students crazy because everything is so incredibly abstract. And, what's the answer? We don't give it to you. So, progressivism, and I didn't really finish Alex's question. You had originally asked me for more negative examples. Instead of positive. Oh, Thomas's question. Sorry. So when you asked me what's progressivism, it's just part of the same thing. So I said, well, okay, one thing is we know progressivism doesn't go that far because the shit doesn't have to. We also know it's kind of a mixed bag. So negatives, the progressives want to build parks for the poor, but they want to do it because they want to control the poor. If you're wealthy. If you're poor, you're like, oh, I can get away with that because we want parks. Remember, there's the park example. There's the issue of women get the vote, but Prohibition ends up being part of that package too, and sadly enough, prohibition comes first. The women's vote comes second. Because the women's vote is the 19th Amendment, prohibition is the 18th. But the two they actually travel together. It's even the same people pushing for it. And the push for prohibition, we could say, well, yeah, it goes back a century, and yes, I told you the story about Americans are consuming way too much alcohol to begin with, right?
Just the right.
No, I didn't tell you that it turns out, prohibition comes at a time in the country is basically a bunch of raging alcoholics.
Well, yeah, because they're all working sweatshops. I would too.
Okay, so you're on to the immigrant aspect, which I'm going to get to. But, no, so it's very interesting. Two countries in the Western world have had prohibition. One is this one. Do you know what the other one is?
Canada.
Nope.
Alaska.
Bolivia.
Yes, the country of Alaska.
Argentina.
Good yes, but no.
Cuba.
Burma.
None of you are anywhere near Sweden.
Sweden.
And here's the interesting thing. Northern Europe.
Not something.
All the way up.
Moonshine.
Okay, so when you all talk at once, I can't even say something clever because there's too many good responses. Shh, quiet.
Sound like my parents.
So, the Swedes also adopt this ban on alcohol, and it turns out the United States and Sweden both had something in common. Both countries were consuming 6 times more alcohol per person
They're up there in the
than the rest of the Western world.
Oh, God.
Yes, no, I'm talking about, you take, say, the Germans, the English, the French,
Ew.
Americans and Swedes are consuming per person 6 times more than those countries per person.
What about now?
So if the French are having a glass of wine per day, the Americans are having 6.
I think it's just a bigger glass.
That could work if that works for you, but so it's actually true in some respects. The Americans really were consuming a huge amount of alcohol. The progressives, though, decide that the problem. So they're watching as industrial capitalism is affecting corruption and all of this stuff. And by the way, if we want to go back to Thomas's point, the progressives aren't actually successful in getting rid of corruption. They give us, yes, we get direct election senators. Yes, we get secret ballots. And yes, to some degree, there are good government associations that are pushing for getting rid of corruption. And to some degree, they're successful. There's even the book I mentioned about Chicago, St. Louis, that comparison, and Chicago versus Oklahoma City. Which again is hard to believe. But anyway, so there is that, and at the same time, they don't actually fix it. Right? It's still there. And the railroads are a classic example because the railroads still have this kind of corruption going on. So they don't entirely fix it, even though there's an impulse there. And then what they decide, as they're looking at urban poverty and all of these immigrants living in tenements, the Jacob Riis pictures that I mentioned, or I think I had to look at briefly. Speaking of broken fingers, they're looking at these problems and they decide that the solution to the problem is, well, these people are just drinking too much. If we take away their alcohol, they'll all be proper industrious citizens. And it turns out that's not actually going to fix the problem. All it does is guarantee that we get bootlegging and an underground economy and Al Capone.
And
Yes.
So then what's your opinion on drugs?
So Chicago actually gets the gangsters because of prohibition, and they're all doing these runs of alcohol from Canada into the US.
they invented the drive-by.
Huh?
Drugs.
Capone?
Yeah.
Capone. Became an expert at drive-by.
Capone.
The drive-by.
Capone's enemy invented the drive-by.
Not the song.
Yeah, it's really That's the experience my teacher, her dad,
Why does that seem like the kind of family lore you would not want to repeat?
My
I feel like
great
that was a
grandparents
lot.
were bootleggers.
FBI
raided. The FBI raided my great grandpa's farm.
With your last name, aren't you related to like the 3-century-old like?
No. You're thinking of my
family
dad's side of the
origin?
family. My dad's side of the family only came here in '96, and my mom's side of the family came here in 1896.
Oh, no, so
Yeah.
they're the bootleggers.
Yeah, they're the bootleggers. So they had my great grandpa's uncle's farm. The FBI raided it with machine guns and everything. They were looking for the stuff they were using to make the alcohol. They couldn't find it. It was in the chicken coop, but they couldn't find it. No, wait, it wasn't in it. It was under the chicken coop. They couldn't find it.
They looked inside.
They did look inside.
All they found was eggs.
My grandfather was an alcoholic.
But yes, so it has these consequences from the prohibition. But a lot of it is blaming the immigrants for the problems of the industrial city, and doesn't fix it. No, not really. And here's the other thing I mentioned. I didn't mention Warren Harding. Maybe I mentioned him. He's the president elected in 1920. It's the first time women have a vote, right? And unfortunately, the vote goes to Warren Harding. And Harding was considered at that time the dumbest man to have ever held that office.
Not now.
When he died, there was a very funny a journalist. No, it's a very funny guy who wrote that, as he put it, the only man who could have 7 grammatical errors in a single sentence, including a triple negative, has just died.
That's kind of
What do you say?
I'm not done.
Yeah, like that.
I'm really not done.
Yet you can't do it consciously. Anyway, he was also the guy I mentioned. He was part of the Teapot Film scandal, which is this kickback operation where oil companies are trying to get these contracts for the West. Anyway,
There we go, I got it.
in Warren Harding's White House, you could go visit him in the Oval Office, and he had bootleg alcohol in his desk.
Didn't every president do that?
Yeah, like,
So, prohibition, right? Here's the president. He has bootleg drink in the Oval Office.
It's not called bootleg to the president.
No, it's still bootleg.
Wait,
He partied.
Well, the easiest way to see it is simply politically. So the Populist Party emerges in the early 1890s from those two movements, right? Farmers. And then you have the Workers' Coalition in place like in Kansas City. In 1892, they have their own party, and in 1896, they decide that since they were unsuccessful in 1892, they're going to merge with the Democrats. Okay, so the populism disappears in 1896. It's fused with the Democratic Party. But the progressives, who are going to take many of those ideas, they emerge in the Republican Party in places like Wisconsin and Illinois, and the Democrats will also have their own progressives. So there isn't a seamless transition, but if you put it in the political terms, it's more visible.
So progressives appeared in the Republican candidates.
Yes. They're initially a caucus within the party. So the Republican and Democratic parties today have what's called caucuses, and they're like people who are in the Congress will be members of a particular caucus. So like there is the Tea Party caucus in the Republican Party. It's like one group within the party, right? And they all meet together and they have their own strategy within the party. Progressivism was its own caucus, but it crossed party lines. It was in both parties had their own caucus. What happens by 1912 is that caucus jumps out of the Republicans and forms their own party behind Teddy Roosevelt. In the same way the Populists had been their own party, then they jump into the two parties, and then the progressives decide to break out of the party and form their own. And then World War I comes along and it disappears.
What's the point of progressivism? Why? Why are they
Well, we still use the term.
What do they want?
That's a good question. It is a kind of not clear term. You would have a hard, I think you'd have a hard time getting a lot of people saying precisely what progressivism is. But the usual one, I would say the most generic kind of thumbnail sketch is progressives are most likely to believe in a positive government message of progressive era. That government is a positive force. No, but they would even say that now. And the reason that's relevant is because you would hear, I don't know, let me just give you an example. Ted Cruz in Texas is somebody who has never seen anything government has ever done as being profit. Right? And so he would be on the other side.
So wait, after the progressives broke out in their own party and then the World War II won the is that like the point where like Republicans and Democrats became more of a progressive?
So the political scientists talk about the party system, and they'll say that we've been through several party systems. So we have the Federalists, the Democratic Republicans, the first party system. Then we have the Whigs and the Democrats, the second party system. Then we get the Democrats and the Republicans, the third party system. In some respects, we could say we're still in the third party system, but political scientists tend to say there have actually been 3 other realignments in the party system since the formation of the Democrats and Republicans. 2 parties. And so we're actually in the 6th party system because there have been realignments within the 2 parties. And so the 6th that we're in now the 2 parties have shifted enough that we could say that what happens with the progressive era is that they're going into a 4th party system, that it's shifting the parties. They're starting to look more like we know them. They're not quite there yet.
You talked about how there were like progressives within both the Republican and Democrat.
Mostly
parties.
Republican, but yes, both parties.
So when Roosevelt kind of broke off and formed his own party, did the Democrat progressives join him, or were they still kind of their own caucus?
No, his rupture is only within the Republican Party. It's the reason the 1912 election ends up looking the way it does, where the Republicans have basically lost and been pushed into third party status. It's because otherwise their party, with its progressive caucus, had jumped into the progressive party. But this was entirely the cult of personality of Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't have happened. And when he's not on the ticket, when he's not on the ballot in 1916, the progressives can't have the same effect. Anything else? Yeah.
Why did the progressive party disband?
It's just because it costs money to run a political party, and if you're not getting votes, it's just at some point it just falls apart. Yeah, you can. And there's usually, when you're in a situation where people are having intense feelings about something, you can pull them together to a group and say, party. But you can also reach a point where people start retreating from that. And in the case of progressivism, the Progressive Party, World War II sucks the energy out of everything. World War I. Once the U.S. is pulled into World War I in particular, it's all over. I mean, progressivism comes to a grinding halt. The 1920s are this kind of, they really are the roaring decade that Fitzgerald makes it out to be. But then it all comes crashing down in 1929. Something else. Okay, again, you still have a little more time if you have specific questions you want to ask me, because tomorrow we will go back to moving us towards our kind of exit from the class and final topics.
What is your definition of roommate?
Ooh.
My definition, or what's it supposed to mean?
What is your definition?
I don't have my own personal definition.
Why not?
What's your dream?
What is your American dream?
Okay, I think I'll just see you all tomorrow. Okay.
What? That's a valid question.